this is my presentation titled I Was Born with the Devil in Me, The Rise of Serial Killers in the 70s. The 1970s is a time often regarded with nostalgia and popular among the newer generations for its style and movements. There are a number of parallels between the modern day and the 70s. The power of protests, roller skating, bell bottoms, roller skating while wearing bell bottoms, and an obsession with serial killers. Defined by the FBI as the unlawful killing of two or more victims by the same offender in separate events, when people think of serial killers, the first names that come to mind tend to be Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, the Zodiac Killer, the Son of Sam, also known as David Berkowitz, or John Wayne Gacy, all of whom were active or made an appearance in the 1970s, giving the impression that there were many during the period. Which is true. The number of actual serial killers operating in the United States more than doubled from the 1960s to the 1970s, going from 217 to 605, peaking in the 80s before swiftly dropping back down again. But even with the consistent decline of serial killers in number, Netflix's recent 2019 documentary series and 2019 movie, both about Ted Bundy, and one of which stars popular actor Zac Efron, as well as an upcoming 2021 film, also about Ted Bundy, featuring Elijah Wood, it's difficult to shake off the continued popularity and presence of these long-gone individuals from the modern media. These lasting impacts of these figures can be in part attributed to a fundamental shift in how Americans have come to view serial murder, with changes in the investigation process, media, and film culture, establishing serial killers with a cultural relevance that has lasted decades after their downswing. In the 1970s, the influence of the FBI began to change. After the Watergate scandal in 1972 and the death of former FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI faced a makeover, becoming more involved in organized crime and both reconstructing and broadening its level of activity, allowing more attention to be directed to serial murder, which it had left relatively untouched before. With important contributions from figures like Howard Tetton, who passed away in January of this year, and Robert Ressler, the development of behavioral analysis and psychology were applied in more detail to killers, particularly serial ones. The FBI official site notes that it was in the 1970s that the FBI's role in addressing serial killers began to grow as new capabilities were developed. Since then, the FBI has become a leader in behavioral analysis, providing an array of support and training to help identify serial killers and prevent future violence. This newfound approach to detecting serial killers' identities and their motives helped in tracking them down, but it also made them subjects of psychological interest, for the FBI as well as the public. This mental and emotional mystique of serial killers and their behavioral patterns and motivations has since become a deeply rooted characteristic of their popularity, providing the perfect conditions for their romanticization and mystique. With the change in approach to viewing killers as complex, intriguing beings, these apparently wolves in sheep's clothing, who were seemingly normal on the outside, became a national curiosity, which figures recovered largely impacted their depictions. Ted Bundy's trial was broadcasted nationally on television, and he is remembered for the performative aspect of his character, acting as his own attorney during the trial and even proposing marriage while it was still going. His bizarre popularity and fan base contained some of those who presumed him innocent because of his seemingly good nature and appearance. The popularity of these individuals became so significant that in 1977 the Son of Sam law was passed in order to prevent serial killers and other criminals from profiting off their crimes, with the growing number of consumption of serial killer media by the public. A consistent depiction of serial killers as white, charismatic, and educated also fit into the trope of wolf in sheep's clothing, both humanizing the individuals as idealized members of society, as well as reducing them to a mental code to be cracked. While the FBI regards the trend of predominantly white male serial killers as myth, asserting that the racial diversification of serial killers generally mirrors that of the overall U.S. population, it's difficult to ignore the consistent prominence of white male serial killers, if not in actual number, then in their presence in the media. The commerciality of white, charismatic, and educated individuals is a trend that is difficult to ignore. One paper even asserting a link between racial bias and media coverage. The author noted that black serial killers are more often associated with low intelligence or brutality in comparison to their calculating or charismatic white counterparts, arguably catering to the bias of the public and creating a more favorable and seemingly complex anomaly to be made romanticized or shocking for media consumption. Even serial killer group killings, the Manson family remaining a much more present in the modern media than the zebra murders of the early 70s in San Francisco. One of the few depictions of one of the zebra killers, or death angels as they call themselves, is in a 1974 film. While the zebra killer it's likely inspired by was black in real life, the film instead tells the story of a young man committing murder in blackface. The general lack of black or other serial killers suggesting an inherent disparity in their representation in the media. The fictional world would also play a large role in the shift in the way Americans perceived serial killers. Changes on the screen during the decade of the 70s introduced more shocking, unprecedentedly violent, and graphic films. With a focus on religious and psychological horror, fear of the seemingly normal began to replace Frankenstein, the creature of the Black Lagoon, and other classic monsters. Instead, the ordinary became fair game for fear. Films such as Carrie and Halloween changed the way the movie industry portrayed murder, becoming a thrill rather than a harsh reality. The shock factor of these films also contained a consistent emphasis on serial killers, with characters like Michael Myers, the Gemini Killer, and Leatherface, often based on real-life serial killers, claiming their spotlight as an increasingly frequent topic, bolstering their screen time and, as a consequence, their popularity and intrigue. The performative nature of these charismatic, cunning, and cruel characters, as they have practically become figures larger than themselves, has influenced the reception and depiction of serial killers in media and film since. With the sale of serial killer merchandise and popular TV shows based on serial killers, along with documentaries and the introduction of new fictional killers, the fascination has maintained a strong grip on the minds of the American people. The massive surge of serial killers and their popularity in the 1970s would likely not have made as deep an impression without these changes in investigation practices regarding serial killers and the approach of media and film culture in depicting them. Made into murderous, yet multifaceted members of society, the desire to understand and yet condemn these individuals developed a pull that would remain with the American public ever since. Modern American media has yet to let go of the profitable infatuation it finds with serial killers, continuing to place them on a pedestal of notoriety and mystery. While serial killers are unlikely to make a new appearance, the consistent nostalgic cravings of the mainstream culture indicate that, at least in name, serial killers, particularly the legacy of those from the 70s, have solidified their place in American pop culture